Perfect. We are live here. Hello, everybody. My name's Jeremy Wilkes. I am a science journalist at Euronews Television. I make a program about climate change called Climate Now. Have a look on euronews.com/climate now. That's my little advert out of the way. But please have a look because it's full of interesting stories about adaptation, building resilience, the kinds of things we're going to be talking about in this session. Because we're talking about using data from Copernicus. And even if you've never heard of the Copernicus program from the EU, you're going to hear all about it in this panel. It's absolutely fascinating what's happening at the moment. We're talking about data-driven solutions to improve your decision-making and really help you to build resilience and deal with the effects of climate change as they're coming to you in your country. We, of course, have got a Slido poll, because we love Slido, and we want to know what you think. And if you scan the QR codes that you've got or go onto Slido, you can vote. Let us know how well do you know the Copernicus program. And if you don't know it very well at the moment, well, then you might learn quite a lot about it in the next half an hour or so, I hope. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I get the chance to do, because I see Copernicus data in action on the ground, literally in the field. I was in Portugal earlier this year. They had an awful drought, and it was really tough for them. And I was on a farm where they grow almonds, and they grow barley. They have other crops there as well, and all of those were suffering from drought. And I said to the farm manager, speculating, we're standing next to his dirty truck in a field, and I say, do you know anything much about the kinds of data you can get? Do you ever use Copernicus data? Do you know about that? And he got out his phone, which was cracked and dirty. And there, the first thing that was on his phone was all of this climate data that he looks at, particularly things like soil moisture. He's very interested in that. He wants to know how much is in the ground and whether or not he should be irrigating or not. And he's adapting. He's changing the plants that he's growing now, the crops that he's got, and he's moving forwards. We've seen other examples as well. Mayors of small towns in France who are dealing with sea level rise, calling in experts, getting data, trying to understand how they might need to change their planning, their urban planning laws over the next few years. Ski station managers also using data to try and understand how to manage the future as well. So I'm going to now go over to our guests who know about this very well and can take your questions. Let's have a little look at the Slido poll there. I have little knowledge. There we go. 50% say I have little knowledge. 38 say I have knowledge as I occasionally use the Copernicus data. Very good. And 13% say I have no knowledge of it at all. This is a great session. Then you're going to pick up a lot on this. Very good. Let's hand over to our speakers. I'll just quickly introduce them, and then they will give their little presentation. So just on my left here is Carlo Buontempo, who is from the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Just to his left, we have Karina Schuckman, who is from the Copernicus Marine Service. And then on the end there, we have Richard Engeland from the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service. And then joining us online from Italy, which is a pretty nice place to be joining us from, let's be honest. We've got Andreas Brink from the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service and Peter Solomon from the Copernicus Emergency Management Service. So you'll hear stories, you'll hear anecdotes, and you've got to, honestly, hang around for Andreas. He's last, but he's got a great story about gorillas, and honestly, I'm desperate to hear it. So just hang out for that one. But Carlo, over to you. Let's talk about what you do at the Copernicus Climate Change Service.
Thank you, Jeremy. A pleasure to be here with you and finally to meet you in person.
Absolutely.
We had a number of events online, and we discussed about climate on a number of occasions, but never met you in person. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And it's also, as you said, a very good session, because there is a fraction of the audience in the room and connecting from home who actually is not so familiar with the Copernicus product. And so we'll be delighted to present what we are doing. So I would like to start with one slide. This is actually an extract from our State of the Climate report. It is a report that we publish every year on Earth Day, so in April, that looks at what's happening in Europe, what has happened over the last year. And the data that you see there are all indicators of the changing climate. So the changes in concentration of greenhouse gases, the changes in temperature in Europe that is actually warming up faster than any other land region in the world, the changes in the sea level, in the sea surface temperature. We have just been through the warmest summer on record. And the glaciers retreat. We lost 30 meters of ice in the glaciers in Europe. So all these indicators are coming from data that is open and freely available on the Copernicus climate change website. So this is very important. It's part of the Copernicus license, the idea that all the data is open and freely available. But what you see here are basically indicators, and indicators of the climate. And this is very much linked. I'm a climate scientist. I'm a physicist as a training. And it's very much the physical basis of the climate. It's important. It describes, using the definition of the Global Climate Observing System, the big cycle, the cycle of water, the cycle of carbon, the cycle of energy. So having this information available allows us to understand what is changing in the world. But the reason why I'm excited about this program is the fact that this data doesn't stay there. Actually, it's transformed into something that makes sense for society, for the many users that we were just discussing about and we hear more about. And I picked up one example. Well, it's a double example, if you allow me. On the left-hand side, what you see is a work not done by the Copernicus Climate Change Service, but actually done by IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, looking at what are the best positions in Africa where to install solar and wind farm to meet the demand for the continent. And you need a lot of information that is coming from different sources, information about where infrastructures are, where population is, but you need information about the climate, because that information is critical to understand where you can maximize the production. On the right, another output of our State of the Climate report, and this actually looks at an important event that had taken place in 2021, and it was a wind drought. Wind drought means that the wind in a significant fraction of Western Europe was less intense than we were expecting. And this has an impact. We are making a transition towards a low-carbon energy mix, renewable energy. So understanding what is the risk we are facing, what is the variability we are facing, is extremely important. So just a very, very quick example for energy. I could have provided example for water, irrigations, for agriculture, for health. Each sector has a number of users who depend crucially on this free and open data that we make available.
Carlo, every month you come out with your climate bulletins, and then you also have your seasonal forecasts as well. How are people responding to that and using those now? I mean, I use them in my work as a journalist, but how are people using them and responding to those?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We have seen over the last few years, since we became operational in 2018, a huge increase in the uptake of those products. So when at the beginning of September, we declared the last summer the warmest on record, then it was on all newspaper, on TV.
I know, we read about you in the press everywhere.
And the same is happening with seasonal prediction, because I presented here about observation, that is mostly about the past, by the nature of observation. But on the same platform, you have information for the next few months, you have information about the next few decades, that we were just discussing about those. And for instance, now, everyone is looking at us to know what the winter will be like in terms of temperature. We will face a cold phase this winter or not, and this has significant implication, not just for the climate, but for our society and our energy provision.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, am I going to need to turn up the heating or get a woolly jumper? It's much more significant and profound than that, absolutely. Well, plenty of questions I'm sure that you have for Carlo. Please save those, send those through. They'll be coming through on my iPad here in the Q&A section, which is fantastic, so I can hear from you as well. Please, let's go over to Richard now. I think you probably need to have the clicker to talk through your presentation, do you? Richard, tell us about the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeremy, and a pleasure to be here and indeed to talk about the Atmosphere Monitoring Service as part of Copernicus. So CAMS, in short, for the Atmosphere Monitoring Service, is all about monitoring the composition of the atmosphere. So we look at air quality, we look at volcanic eruptions, we look at dust storms. It's all part of the data we provide. But what I want to highlight here is sort of combining this data to provide information that's really relevant for what we are discussing here as part of COP27, which is climate mitigation and making better use of solar energy. So what we do is try to support people who are actually implementing solar power plants anywhere in the world. You can imagine, if you want to build a big solar power farm, you need to know how efficient it will be. You would like to know how much radiation is there available throughout the year, what are the fluctuations, how can I be most efficient in running this renewable energy power plant. So what you need is input on the radiation, on the amount of radiation you receive at the ground, and you can measure this. You can measure this from the surface, but in order to to get good statistics, you will need a long data record, and that's in a lot of locations just impossible to achieve once you start planning the position of a solar power plant. So this is where CAMS comes in. We can combine the data we have. We monitor aerosols, which affect solar radiation. We monitor ozone, which affects atmospheric radiation. We combine that with cloud information, because obviously clouds have a really important impact on the solar radiation. And we combine that all to provide a very accurate estimate of solar radiation at the ground at any location in the world. And this is exactly the information either people building these solar power plants need, or consultancy firms that advise and help these people to do exactly that. So CAMS data is used on the ground for planning purposes. Where should I put my solar power plant? There's actually another element as well. If you are maintaining a big solar power plant, lots of solar panels, you need to be worried about cleaning them. They become less efficient with, for instance, more dust. You can see here a picture of a car. We all know this. We have these dust outbreaks from the Sahara, for instance, coming to Europe, or even to North and South America. And in other parts of the world, with different deserts, these important dust plumes. This comes down on the solar panels. It affects the efficiency. And if you know how much is coming down or what is coming down in the next 10 days, for instance, you can prepare for that and anticipate these important events and help you to maintain the farm better. So this is all information that comes out of CAMS on a daily basis and all accessible through our data stores.
One of the things, the thing that's interesting and important to underline about this is that it's an operational system. This isn't science research to gather data because that's interesting for you. It's all of the time you're coming out with data that people can use operationally on the ground. On that example there of dust, how fast is that turnover? I mean, as somebody who's operating a plant, are they going to be able to get information, really timely information about what's happening?
Well, if you talk about the dust, we have a daily forecast coming out in the late afternoon. So this is directly available. People can access this immediately. We call these town critical applications. So if there's a need, they will know the. So
if they need to plan extra cleaning or whatever, then they know that they're going to, tomorrow we need to get out there because it's going to be bad otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating. If you've got questions about that, please send them through as well. And then we'll be going to the audience about this because it's really interesting, as I say, operational, on the ground, concrete stuff. Not necessarily just on the ground either, also on the water. Karina von Schuckmann, let's pass over to you from... Did you see the way I did that? With the ground and the water? That was pretty smart too. And Karina, I forgot to say Von when I was introducing you earlier, but I think there's a Von in there, isn't there? Karina von Schuckmann. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm quite thrilled for the opportunity to see here that there are many curious to be informed about this unique program which provides access to a huge amount of data across the different topics, data which are based on observations from remote sensing or from in situ observations, and also from reanalysis system, model systems. So I'm quite thrilled about this, and what could be the best way to do it through stories of how those data are used with success. So I will provide some data-driven solutions for the ocean. And I skipped my slides by myself. So we will provide here now some overview with specific focus on African youth, with link to the topic of this COP27. So first, to have an overview here on the very left on where and how much of those data are used, how many countries, and that does information, the latest information for the year 2020. And who is using this data? So there are different actors which are using this data, which range from university, but also institutions and industrial sectors. And what are the different products which are of major interest for these specific areas, which is reaching from global products on analysis, but also forecast systems, which are provided on a combined use of observations with modeling experience, and also with specific regional products such for the Mediterranean Sea. So other activities which are driven in order to increase capacity building and also to further provide information on the use and the variety of products available. There are different activities organized as part of the Copernicus Marine Service for called Marine Data for Africa training workshop, Ocean Challenge for Africa hackathon, and e-learning material, which are different varieties of capacity building ranging from different on-hands technical capacity exchanges with Jupyter notebooks, etc., and also exchanges on the uses and examples on the use of those data. And so this is part of a so-called Africa Startup Journey, which is Copernicus Marine implementing in, so which is ranging from the part of detection, pre-incubation, incubation, and acceleration parts. So there's different steps. Some of those I've just presented on terms of the workshops and the hackathons organized, but also there's supporting and partnerships with different actors at African scale, like BFA Global or Ocean Hub Africa, which are specifically supporting accelerator parts, for example, for startup building, and where we collaborate in order to provide information on the specific data. So there are two use cases I wanted to provide here. So the first one is the capacity in fisheries resources. So it's one example of what had been implemented by using marine environmental data, capacities in terms of modeling and prediction parts in order to inform on environmental conditions linking to local economies. And another one is on this coral bleaching monitoring service, which is providing for the Indian Ocean part close to the coast of Africa, Eastern Africa, information on the status, but also alerts on degradation status for coral sites. So this is from my side, the examples.
Thanks, Karina. I'm curious about the kind of nitty-gritty of how you manage to get the data into the hands of the possible users. How do you kind of manage that bridge, that last kilometer, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. Thank you for that one. So as you have seen with this example, there are different variety of tools, either through capacity on-hands exchanges, but also to provision in collaboration with local actors on bulletins, etc. And there's also another example because you need to apply different tools in order to make the information reach to different applications and different capacities of people using the data. There's another use case in terms of providing information. University of Ghana and GMES and Africa is working on this. They're providing an alert system in terms of environmental conditions. And so it's a very easy one that there is a numbering of 1, 2, 3 sent by messages and those who have access to a mobile phone. So it's really on the local and traditional fishing. And they use the information, and they have also flags on their boats with colors, red, green, and yellow.
Everybody can understand that then. It's totally,
so that people who have not a mobile access are warned, and then what is this really security part with the canoes out there and to alert on the conditions. So
that's very smart.
Yeah.
And that brings us, I think, quite nicely actually over to Peter Salomon from the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, joining us from the JRC. Hello, Peter. Would you like to go ahead?
Yes, morning Jeremy, morning everybody. Greetings from sunny Italy. I take it's sunny there as well.
Yep.
Thanks for the opportunity to share with you some ideas on how we support disaster resilience also in Africa.
That's the wrong presentation, whoever's in charge of the presentation. Sorry, this is Peter Salomon we got here.
So I can maybe continue while I also see that it's a wrong naming.
I'm sure they're going to change it.
Okay, I'll continue in the meantime. So how do we support disaster resilience, not only in Europe, but also in other regions around the world, and in particular in Africa? Once we see the slides, you can see a little bit an overview of what we do within the emergency management service. Yes, that's exactly the slide. And the important thing here is that we try and provide data and information really to support the whole disaster risk management cycle. So we are not only trying to monitor ongoing events, but really try also do something about preparedness. So being providing early warning forecast information to reduce the impacts, or even go further down the chain and basically do prevention, try and look at risk assessment. So is my house, located in a flood risk area, or can it be affected by, is it in a risk zone for wildfires? We also do that for the post-disaster phase, so looking when providing information after a disaster has hit an area, so supporting the recovery, trying to get communities back on the foot, let's put it this way, as quick as possible. And you see here on the slide a couple of examples of all these different products. I mean, on the left-hand side, you see, for example, this was a flood extent map for the cyclone Imnati in February 2022 that hit Madagascar. A little bit below in the image, you see we look at risk assessment, or this is a crop change for an area in Nigeria. In the center, you see some on top, and in the bottom, you see images taken from our early warning and monitoring system, where we produce regular forecasts and information on the hazards that have the biggest impacts, not only in Europe and in Africa, but unfortunately around the world. So floods, forest fires, and droughts. And on the right-hand side, you see images of our exposure data. And this is really fundamental. So we need to know basically where people live, where buildings are, in order to really be able to predict the impact of a disaster or monitor the impact. But I brought to you actually two use cases that I would like to share with you. So next slide, please. And the one is really about bringing the early warning information and data into early action at local level. So on the left-hand side, the image is an image taken in Uganda, and this is about a flood event that happened in May 2020. There, the International Red Cross and together with the Ugandan Meteorological Service have developed standard protocols that using the forecast information that we provide in the emergency management service from our global systems to really transform this into local action. And the local action, as you can see, can be as easy as distributing water canisters or water purification tablets, tents, which are obviously difficult to distribute when a flood event is ongoing, right? But could also mean the evacuation even of specific areas or region. So I think this is a nice case how you can transform this global data into really local action. The second use case I want to show you is not so much about data, but it's more about empowering users through knowledge transfer. And it's related to droughts, which Jeremy, you mentioned is the impact can be quite severe. So what you see here is the East African Drought Watch on the right-hand bottom image there. And this is a drought monitoring and forecasting system that was built based on the knowledge and together with the emergency management service. So really transferring the concepts, the ideas to the local or regional authorities so that they can build up their own system and build trust in this type of systems, and in such a way really increase the resilience to the local and regional resilience to all kinds of disasters in this area. So I think I'll hand back to you, Jeremy. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Peter. A quick question for you. Looking at the range of information that you can offer, is there one that you found that the users are most interested in? Drought, for example, or fires or flooding? What are the products that people are most engaged with at the moment?
Yes, I mean, as you can imagine, also from the news, I mean, unfortunately, it's most of our products are related to floods, forest fires, and droughts. In Europe, we had a severe drought event, and again, quite extensive wildfires affecting large parts in Europe, and this is true also for many parts in the rest of the world. I just remind you of the Pakistan floods that happened a couple of months ago that were outrageous from a demand, from a size, something I think we rarely see, such huge floods. So it's the typical kind of hazards, unfortunately, that keep us busy and that are also the most demanded products.
Thank you very much for that one, Peter. And I'm going to come back and ask you a little bit more about the early warning system as well later on, because I think that's really interesting. Also, thank you to those who are sending in questions. I'm receiving them here, and we'll get to those very soon. But first, we've got a great story from Andreas Brink. Thank you, Andreas, for being patient and waiting for this one. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, Jeremy, you asked for real-life stories, so I really picked one of my favorites, which is set in the Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, bordering Rwanda and Uganda. So within the Copernicus land service, and particularly the global land service, we have a specific activity called high-resolution hotspot monitoring, which is an on-demand service which we use, for example, for mapping and monitoring protected areas and national parks. Next slide, please. And the example I give you is set in Virunga. It's a very practical example on how we use this data. So what's the issue here? The guy you see here, that's Andre Bauma, a park ranger. But more than a park ranger, he's actually a caregiver to orphan gorillas. The young gorilla here is Ndakazi, who unfortunately died last year because of a disease they couldn't heal. However, why was Ndakazi an orphan gorilla in the first place? It's because the gorilla parents, were killed by poachers. And what's the value of a dead gorilla? They don't have ivory like an elephant or rhino, which you could sell on a black market. It's the forest. It's the forest that the trees they live in. So this is the real interest. Without gorillas, there would be less interest to protect the areas. Next slide, please. And so in this area, there's really a very strong and powerful charcoal mafia, which clears land, especially inside the park, because here is the better forest, better trees. And it's big money. It's about $35 million every year. So next slide, please. So what we do together with the park authorities, with the park rangers, is to map and monitor the park. These are huge areas. This park here is about 7,000 square kilometers, so not easy to monitor. So we provide, for example, the Copernicus Sentinel-2 satellite images and train them on how to use these images. Next slide, please. But more than just images, we produce within the hotspot activity very highly detailed and accurate land cover and land cover change maps, like you see on the left side here. So this is a generalized land cover map of 2016. And you see in green, south of Lake Edward, it's all natural vegetation, it's all forest, and then you see some wetlands. And together with the park rangers, we overlay then more recent satellite images, like we see on the right side, and try to identify if there's areas which have been illegally cleared, like we see in the red rectangle there. And from here, we can then quantify how much has been cleared, and the rangers can eventually take action then, really targeted action in the field. Next slide. And eventually, if they're lucky, they can confiscate the illegally produced charcoal, like you see here in this big bags. Next slide. So Marvale here, a female park ranger, and her colleagues, they can protect the park from these issues. Next slide. So they protect the park from the agriculture encroachment, from illegal deforestation, and even from poaching, risking their lives really very often. Next slide. But what they cannot do is protect the park from climate change. And this is already ongoing. This is data derived, the observed data derived from the Copernicus Climate Service. And it shows that already in the last 40 years, there's a temperature increase of, in our area, about 1 degree Celsius. And this, according to the models, will increase even more in the upcoming future. Next slide. What does this mean to the habitat in particular, and what does it mean in particular to our gorillas? So already now they show increased stress level due to the rainfall variability, but in particular due to the increase in temperatures. So they are already moving to higher elevations in the mountains, and it doesn't go much higher actually than that. And what is the problem? The problem is that one of their favorite foods, like the bamboo leaves, they don't grow so high. And even worse is that due to the temperature increase, they have to drink more. Of course, we do the same. It gets warmer, we drink more. But gorillas, they're not used to drink much. They take their water intake from the fruits and the leaves they eat. So now they have to start looking for water holes, which they are not used to. It takes time from looking for food and for other social activities, and they even could get diseases from the water. So a lot of issues, a lot of problems to the park, a lot of challenges to the park rangers and to the gorillas. And monitoring land cover and the land cover dynamics is certainly a key factor here. And yeah, we are quite happy from the Copernicus hotspot service that we can support in mapping these areas and in providing capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. That's a wonderful story, and I think everybody probably found that as really fascinating. I mean, the idea that the gorillas have to change altitude because of the temperature and all those challenges that come with it. Would we have known those things without these tools? One thing I'm interested in, you touched on it quickly. There was a slide that showed it, the training that you're doing to help people to understand the maps. How does that work? Can you talk us through how you do that training?
Every time we produce a map or even a series of maps for different areas, we organize capacity building training. So our local partners are really involved also from the beginning. We discuss with them what are the requirements, what are the issues in the field. Of course, they know the field much better than we do. So we discuss this, and then at the end, we work together on how accessing this data, which is, as we heard before, all free and open, and on how using it and eventually building on it. So using more recent satellite images and to see if there are more recent changes.
What are the kind of challenges that people encounter or that you find in terms of feedback from the users in terms of understanding that data? You know, what do they find difficult, I suppose?
But very practical issues, of course, connectivity. So even if this improved very much in Africa, but in some remote areas, it's still not easy to get access to satellite images because of their size. But otherwise, a lot of this park authorities have geospatial teams in place, and they have a good understanding. And I think the data we produce is also quite easy and clear to understand. And satellite images, they don't lie. You can see it is a clear cut in the forest.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to some of the questions that we've had here. Thank you for sending them through. We've also got a Slido poll underway at the moment, and which you can take part in as you wish, asking you to rate how useful you found this session in terms of increasing your understanding of Copernicus services. If you have questions about Copernicus services, of course, send them over now. At the moment, nobody's voting, but we'll come back to that one very soon. Let's have a look at some of the questions that we've got coming through in our Q&A. Is the open data from Copernicus worldwide or specific to Europe? It does seem like a decent question, actually, because it is obviously the European Union's Earth observation system, but do you cover everywhere with the same resolution, the same data? Carlo?
So the simple answer is yes, it's global. The data, the majority of the data we serve is global. Clearly, there are some data sets that are of more regional focus, such as regional reanalysis or regional climate projection. But the vast majority of the product we provide have a global reach.
Karina, in marine service, is it the same?
Yes, so it's absolutely the same, that there is data available for all the different so-called essential ocean variables from the different products across the globe, with some specific products which are regionalized for the European seas.
Richard?
It's global, but with a zoom in over Europe for atmosphere monitoring service. So we monitor atmospheric composition globally, we look at fire emissions globally, dust outbreaks globally, etc. But we also looked then specifically at the European domain for more detailed air quality information.
I'm British. You mean geographical Europe, right? Not the EU. I don't want to mention it, but you know what I mean.
You're exactly right. It's we have a Zoom box over Europe, including all the countries.
Okay. Peter?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's the same for the emergency management service. We do provide global information, or we can produce all the products or most of the products anywhere around the world. There are, for some of the forecasting and monitoring system, obviously, there are regional products, as I showed as well, that are for Europe a bit higher resolution. But in principle, all the products are available globally as well.
And Andreas? On the land side?
So on the land, there is a global component, which by definition is really global vegetation monitoring, for example. And specifically the hotspot component, which I presented, is really just outside Europe. There's a European hotspot component, really focusing just at Europe. But the one I presented is for local specific areas just outside Europe.
I'm going to go into some more of the questions that we've got here, and thanks for those. It's great. I love this tool. It's fantastic, Slido. And so, please send in your questions. Now, this one is a good one. Do you have to download the data manually as you need it, or can you take it automatically as it updates as a kind of stream? Who fancies taking that one?
You can download the data manually if you like. But all the data sets are provided coming with an API that you can use, so it can be done automatically machine to machine, and the API is very well documented. I'm talking about the climate change service, certainly, but I think it's true for most of the other services. I
see nodding. That's the case for everybody across here, that you can kind of tailor it to whatever you want, actually. Are there any applications from Copernicus for water scarcity and quality?
I can maybe take that, and then maybe Carlo can complement from the climate change service, I guess. So yes, we do have, I mean, the drought observatories in particular look at low flow events as well. So there's, and then of course soil moisture monitoring. We also use, in fact, the seasonal predictions that come out of the climate change service to also look at these hydrological related variable and integrate them into our drought indicator. What we do not have is, or at least not yet, is something on water quality, and that's in the emergency management service. But there is a lot of products also on water scarcity in the climate change service, right, Carlo?
Can I?
Go on, Carlo, go on. I think he's finished, go on.
Yeah, okay. Yes, indeed. So it was just, I can only nod to everything that Peter has said, but there is a very strong collaboration between the two services on hydrology and hydrological data. I guess on top of this hydrological prediction, an important element for me are the observation of soil moisture that are coming from satellites. So estimation of soil moisture are a key and important component also of our monthly bulletin, looking at the status at present. But looking at the portfolio of product, it's quite clear, and we discussed many times with Peter, that surface hydrology is one of these parameters that is still poorly observed from satellite. So it's one of these areas where we need to do more.
Karina, can I bring you in as well?
Yeah, for the ocean side, I can also mention that water quality is an important aspect. Beside the environmental aspect, it's also important, for example, for the economic aspect for tourism. So there are remote sensing data available for ocean color, which can be used in order to link to water quality. And there had been also a specific project, for example, during pandemic time with ESA together.
What would somebody be using that information for then?
So, yes, I'm just explaining.
Go on.
Thank you. And so another one is, for example, a specific application is the use for these data for so-called eutrophication in the ocean, so which is one of the targets of SDG 14.1. So there's a specific indicator which had been developed, so which is an important aspect for also water quality and then also the plume development, etc., biodiversity. And these data are available, and also these indicators regularly delivered to Eurostat for the SDG reporting activities.
Another question we have here, can Copernicus be used systematically to estimate CO2 and methane emissions around the world, and what interpretation is needed to transform raw data into meaningful and mappable information?
I can take that. A great question, because we have a whole session on this topic in the afternoon. So please come back for that one as well.
Yeah, exactly. Come back here at 4 o'clock.
Exactly. So the short answer is that this is really the next step in what we do as part of the Atmosphere Monitoring Service. We want to monitor emissions for greenhouse gases, but also for atmospheric pollutants. This is not a straightforward thing, because indeed, going from the raw data to the emissions, we need all the information we can get, including the observation, but also the modeling of the atmosphere, and the information we already have about the emissions. So this is ramping up. We want to be fully operational by 2026, so it will take a few more years. But if you want to hear more details, yeah, please come back at 4 o'clock.
I think we've got some questions from the audience here.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Bit closer, bit closer.
So it's clear that Copernicus is a user-driven service. So you mentioned different examples. My question to the panel now is, we are here at the COP. There are people, politicians discussing in very important things. Can you give 1 or 2 examples of how Copernicus can support the decision-making process for people who are dealing now with the tough discussions at the COP?
Who fancies taking that one?
I can start
Go on,
and then maybe be complemented from the other services. So, of course, there are different opportunities, and we have also around these different pavilions, different discussions on how to better link the science policy interface and also the data delivery. So there are different tools. So there are regular reporting activities, also like for the climate change service on the bulletins. We have also the ocean state report activity. There are deliveries and close collaborations, for example, with political statistical centers, like we are doing for Eurostat, where we specifically prepare the indicator in collaboration to specifically reply to the policy need in terms of environmental reporting linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are just some examples, and many others in terms of linking between the science policy interface, and I think you can complement more from the other services on that one.
Who else fancies talking about that? Go on, Carlo.
Yeah, good question. I was thinking, what is the best example to see to respond to the question? And I came up with 2. In a sense, I don't think that any policy can be developed in the absence of good and firm evidence. So the fact that we are able to provide those evidence, especially in an extreme event, that actually are altering the narrative, altering the discourse on climate change, I think is extremely important. The second element, and it can be considered a specific element of that, is what has happened with methane. Methane has become all of a sudden a key topic of discussion politically, and that topic wouldn't have been so had not been for high quality observation made available openly and freely to everyone.
We had another question in the audience. Oh, we'll get to you.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Vanessa Farsen, GIZ, German Development Corporation. I'm really, really happy. Thank you so much for your input. I love it because it's so concrete. I have 2 questions, one regarding mitigation and one regarding adaptation. Regarding mitigation, we just heard that the Copernicus also monitors emissions for greenhouse gas emissions and methane. How is this connected to the national MRV systems, or is there already a connection that basically with this data, national governments can be informed to actually, again, then, let it flow into the policy processes, actually to getting there, to achieving the 1.5 or reducing emissions? The question for adaptation I have is regarding the early warning systems, which have been mentioned with the flooding, for example, in Madagascar, or I think in the Horn of Africa, the droughts. With all this data available, which is for free, which is great, but how does it work? The data is there, we can download it, but who actually formulates the recommendations for the people on the ground? How does it get to the people? Often, Madagascar is really hardly hit by climate change. Every year there are many, many cyclones, many rain, winds and flooding, and then usually there are big power cuts. So there's no electricity whatsoever. So how does the information get to the people?
That's a really good question.
Do the people actually have, how do they move then?
Anybody who's been at this COP knows that connectivity is a rare resource, isn't it? Possibly as difficult to get as the water. Peter, would you like to take that one?
Yes, absolutely. Indeed. I mean, you're pointing to a very important point, but also it's always, it's many times it's a weak link in the chain. Early warning in particular is only efficient if the entire chain from the basically data production from the forecast information arrives also to the local community, and then the local community needs to know what needs to be done. Now, in a bit similar to what was presented also from other use cases here, you heard on the Copernicus program. I mean, we need, let's say, that the engagement of national authorities, local communities, in order to create that last step, that last mile, in order to make it really efficient. This is something that, I mean, you heard it in the story about the gorillas. We need to engage with them in order for them to adapt the data that we provided at a, often at a global scale to local needs. I mean, in the case that I presented, without the Red Cross and the Ugandan Med Service developing these protocols so that they know what they need to do in the case of a flood forecast, this probably would not have worked. So we need definitely an engagement and of these kind of users in order to take the data and catalyze them and bring them into local action. So yes, and that's we can do that with training, we can do that with capacity building, but this is and has to be a continuous effort.
Work in progress. Quickly, Carlo, you wanted to talk on that one, did you? Or was it the other question?
No, on this one, very, very shortly, just to be concrete. An example for me is what is happening with the World Food Programme, for instance. World Food Programme is already using our seasonal prediction to inform their decision on the ground now. And they are a quite actually sophisticated user of seasonal prediction. So they analyze the output, transform it, and then take action. So it's not all about what we do ourselves, but it's really what is being done downstream of us.
If I may add just a sentence, Jeremy?
Yeah, go on.
Good. Specifically within Africa, and I saw that before on the slide, there's a program called GMES and Africa, which is in a way Copernicus tailored for Africa. And here we work with the African Union Commission and within regional institutions to customize the Copernicus data for specific African needs. And this trickles then down into the, let's say, national governments and also into the local industry, which then builds specific applications for needs on the field.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Karina.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for these wonderful questions. So again, as mentioned earlier, the Copernicus services are user-driven services. So the data are for free, but you have to subscribe in order to give up opportunity for an uptake of the use of the data, which in turn allows to understand what the needs are and to further evolve the whole system in order to reply more to user needs. And so to come to your question, I would like to come back to my example I mentioned earlier. So one of these was this example on the use of an environmental condition for traditional fisheries, where there is a simple system of alerting in order for security questions, etc. So the feedback here is that these kind of prediction systems are systems, and in collaboration with these local actors, University of Ghana and also GMES and Africa, is that these kind of prediction systems and use and experience need to be connected and coordinated at global scale. So, as part of the UN Decade for Ocean Decade, sorry, there is one program. So the Mercator Ocean, who is driving also the Copernicus Marine Service, is driving the Prediction Center as part of the Ocean Decade, aiming for creating this global network and also considering systems like Copernicus, but also new developments like the digital twin approach, which is linking environmental data with societal approaches in order to reply to these needs and to join capacities and reach the people they need it.
You also had that mitigation question. Can we quickly get to that one before we get on to the other questions, which was related to getting the information to national governments?
I can answer that. So as I said, this is a new part of the portfolio of the atmosphere monitoring service, still being ramped up. But this is exactly the discussion we are having now with countries. Copernicus is all about supporting countries with what they are required to do. There is already an existing reporting process. So it's all about adding information to that we can extract from satellite and ground-based observations. Then it depends on the country how far we go in that support. Some countries have their own national systems they are developing. So there it's more in terms of sharing expertise, providing boundary conditions. The atmosphere doesn't stop at the country boundary. For other countries, it might be quite a bit more because they don't have similar expertise available or the similar infrastructure available. So we really are having this discussion now in this ramp-up phase to see where we can best put our efforts to support countries.
There's the lady over here wanted to ask a question.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. I'm Eser Pirgan from UN in Turkey. I have another question on the early warning systems. Here, previously, the Secretary General of the UN has made a call for covering all the world population through early warning systems. And here we heard that a plan is announced for that to make it happen in the next 5 years. I think the World Meteorological Organization will be coordinating that effort. So after listening to your presentation, it seems that all the technical knowledge, the infrastructure is there to make it happen. Is it? But what are the hindrances? What are the obstacles from making it happen? Is 5 years timeline a too loose timeline or an ambitious one? How do you see that? And do you collaborate with that initiative? Thank you so much.
Does it all come back down to connectivity as well, I wonder? Who wants to take that one?
I can maybe start. Sorry, Carlo,
go ahead.
You want to go first?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so do we work together with WMO on this? Yes, indeed. We believe that the information that we have in Copernicus is indeed fundamental, or can be a significant contribution to reach this goal. Now, obviously, I mean, like with any early warning system, there's always we can always improve things, and it's not like these are already perfect systems. We do our best. We improve. We continuously improve them. And the good thing about here, in particular, about the Copernicus program is, as was mentioned by Jeremy in the beginning, it's an operational program, so we can really ensure the availability of these types of systems, and we can then continuously work on them to further improve them. And I think this is really fundamental. Now, with the comment on, is this an ambitious goal? Absolutely. I think it's not only about having the technology there. This is one important part, but for early warning to work properly, I think we've shown that here in some of the use cases, you need a whole chain to work properly. And here we need a lot of work that comes from at national level, regional and local level. And that's where I actually also see one of the biggest challenges.
Carlo, can I get a quick word from you? We've got a ton of questions and about 5 minutes and 50 seconds left.
Yeah, so I will be extremely brief. I completely agree with what Peter was saying. The point is not just the technology, although technology may be a problem for some of the hazard. So some are easier to tackle than others. But in general, we have made a huge leap forward with the technology. And what is often missing is the interface with the decision maker, training, activity on the ground, interface with the national element. So I think that's where we need to work. And that part somehow is more difficult to forecast how much time it takes. So I agree with Peter. 5 years is an ambitious target, but it's possible.
And it totally ties into, in fact, one of the questions we've got here on Slido. What kind of training is offered to help people to use this? Karina, I think you had something you wanted to say.
I wanted to add something generally on the discussion in terms of your question, and this is again, the services can provide products, and that quality, what observations can bring. And early warning systems are observations which are needed at a regional scale. And so there was just yesterday a huge discussion in terms from the observational global community for the global climate observing system with an implementation plan for calling for a global framework for ocean observations. So reply back is that's another challenge where we need to work together as global community to assure that the measurements are available to assure and just comment that the precision is available along with these data needed in order to provide reliable forecasting and early warning systems.
Can somebody just bring in a little bit of more information about that training question, because I think it's a really interesting one.
Well, in terms of training, we have various activities that we organize, both online, but to some extent also in person. Of course, with the last few years, this has been a bit of a challenge. So we have focused more on online courses, but there's a lot of training available at different levels, more general, but also more focused.
But if I'm a potential user, I can sign up for a kind of webinar. Or do I contact somebody and say, I really need to learn how to use this, can you help me? How does that work?
Both is possible. So you can indeed sign up to a webinar or an MOOC, a massive open online course. But you can also contact our user support services, and they can help you, bring you in contact with the right experts on a specific topic where you have questions. So this is a diverse portfolio in a way of supporting the user to make best use of the data.
Let's go to another question that's got upvoted on Slido. Does Copernicus provide worldwide projections for all climate events, hail, dust, extreme wind, fires and droughts, etc.?
Well, there is always the risk in saying yes to a question that has all in it. So the only correct answer is no, not for all, but for most, or the very large majority, I would say. And yes, global and for all the variable we have.
Does anybody else want to come in on that one? No. Let's go on to the next one. Does commercial use of the data need to be licensed in a specific way? And that is a really good question. What's the deal on that?
No. So it's open and free, and that is really what he means. There is nothing. There are no small print. It's open and free.
There's no secrets there. There's no secrets
no. For the vast majority of product. There are some.
So if I want to build my business on your data,
yes, you can.
Go ahead.
Yes, you can.
We even promote this, so that's often the idea to have a basic data set and that companies build their technology on this then and provide add-on products.
And even in the example I provided earlier, there are activities also coming back to this question on the training, like in order to develop and support startups in order to build up with these data their business. So that's the whole push behind.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's a really strong part of the program because it's an operational program. It's there for many years to be. So companies can build on this. They can rely on the data being available. And yes, it's free and open. They can do with it what they like to do and really find their niche in a wide array of.
Do you actually help people, entrepreneurs, to get started as well? To when they come with maybe a slightly vague or idea, you know, they kind of know what they want to do, but they're not quite sure.
Yes, there have been and still are various different programs, sort of use case support. So people can come with ideas and get funding to get this started, and then try to change this in an operational or a commercial activity. So this functions through different programs within Copernicus itself. But yes, it's available for sure.
Karina, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, there are specific user-related meetings. There are hackathons in order to create ideas, to present winners, winner connect with, and there are partnership with specific companies or organizations in different countries in order to support startup building. So there's a specific engaged support to do that.
And is there one website that somebody here can recommend that we go to if you're interested in this? Somebody watching online says, okay, yeah, I could get into that. Where should they go?
Sure.
Ooh.
The portal of all services, so right there, the user engagement and all the services where you can find all this information.
Basically, look it up online, you'll find it, right?
Pretty much. For climate, it's quite simple, climate.copernicus.eu.
As well.
Marvelous. I'm going to say thank you to everybody now because we've just run out of time, I've noticed. Thank you to Andreas Brink, all the way from Italy, from the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, and also Peter Salomon from the Copernicus Emergency Management Service. Thanks for joining in remotely. Fantastic to speak to you. Thank you very much to Richard Engeland from the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, to Karina von Schuckmann from the Copernicus Marine Service, and to Carlo Buontempo from the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Thank you, everybody.